안녕하세요 여러분, 코치조입니다. Good morning everybody. I am your coach Joe. Let's do Monday's workout. 자, 여러분 월요일 운동을 해보도록 하겠습니다. 오늘은 등하고 삼두예요. 네, 등하고 삼두. 등하고 삼두를 해보도록 하겠습니다. 등하고 삼두를 해보도록 하겠습니다. 등하고 삼두를 해보도록 하겠습니다. 좋아요. 월요일 등하고 삼두. 오늘은 좀 운동을 짧게 하지 않고 충분히 한번 해보도록 하겠습니다. 오늘은 컨디션이 좋은 관계로 운동을 충분히 할게요. 자, 운동하면서 오늘 공부 좀 해보겠습니다. 영어 공부. 네. 경제랑 영어 공부를 CNBC를 통해서 하도록 하겠습니다. 네. 좋아. 안녕하세요. 자, CNBC를 통해서 네. 궁금한 거 물어보셔도 됩니다.
Stock futures pointing to a slightly lower open after Friday's rally pushed it down to the new high, but the Nasdaq, in fact, posted its fifth losing week out of the last six. Margin call shockwaves on Wall Street, really around the world. Some household names, stocks getting crushed after a family office was forced to liquidate positions worth nearly $30 billion. And breaking news from Egypt, the cargo ship blocking the Suez Canal is partially freed. Operations are underway to clear the way for the backlog of ships. Apparently, the toilet paper supply is in jeopardy. Monday, March 29, 2021, and Squawk Boss begins right now.
Welcome to Squawk Box here on CNBC. I'm Becky Quick along with Joe Kernan and Andrew Ron Sorkin, and we are watching the U.S. equity futures very closely this morning. On Friday, you saw some strength across the board. You actually saw the Dow, the S&P 500 and the Dow Transports all closed at record highs on Friday. Dow was up 453 points, and it was up again for the week, which is the third time out of 4 weeks that's been higher. Nasdaq was down for the week. It was up on Friday, but down by about 0.6 for the week, and that puts it down 5 out of 6 weeks. This morning, though, you're seeing some pressure, some additional pressure that we're going to talk about very quickly about why this is coming, those huge margin calls that are out there. Down this morning by about 137 points. S&P futures are off by about 16, and then the Nasdaq indicated down by 32. Last week on Friday, we did see Treasury yields move higher. This morning, you're going to see right now that it looks like the 10-year is sitting just at about 1.657%, so staying in that range. 2.36.
이제 대충 알아듣네요, 이제 여러분.
Is what we're all following this morning. And Andrew, welcome back. It's good to see you.
It's good to see you, and to come back to quite a story. To spend the weekend on the phone with all of these folks. Wall Street has been on edge, trying to understand what's happening. Let's talk about it, because this developing story is causing ripple effects throughout the markets. Capital management is a family office that has huge positions in media stocks and communities. When some of those positions moved against it, that happened last week. We talked about that in a second, why that was. The firm was hit with huge margin calls, was forced to liquidate more than $20 billion in stocks. At the center of all of this is Bill Wang. He's the founder of that firm, which was set up as a family office after his own was closed. He was a part of Tiger Asia. He's a protege, disciple, if you will, of Julian Roberts. And in 2012, he pleaded guilty to wire fraud on behalf of Tiger Asia. Now, all of this seemed to unravel late in the week when Goldman Sachs, which for many years had refused to do business with Bill Wang, by the way, because of those insider trading, not just allegations, but the guilty plea itself, pushed him to sell some of these stocks. He had been long and leveraged long in a very big way, especially when it came to stocks like Viacom and Baidu. Now, Viacom, as we saw last week, was hit hard. In part, we should say it was hit hard because it issued that stock midweek, and frankly, I hate to say it, I think there wasn't enough appetite for that stock. So people always talk about when these stocks are high flying, should they sell stock, raise some cash? Well, that's what they tried to do, except that there really wasn't enough buyers. That in turn really put the short on. You guys talked about it and watched that last week, but as you could see, impacting this company and Bill Wang's return in a very big way. That creating a huge pressure downwards.
We know why it was up, Andrew. We know why it was up so much now, and I wouldn't blame people for not wanting to buy the stock, knowing that it was up on. It was almost a GameStop advance in those things. Did the guy really make $15 billion on $200 million? Did you hear that?
He was using we believe he was using total return swaps.
Once again, it's leverage.
Total return swaps. Yeah, it's all leverage. Something on the order of 3, 4, 5 times. We're going to talk a lot more.
Alarm. 여러분, 그 마진 콜 당했대요. 잠깐만, 끊긴가? 왜 이래? 자, 여러분, 운동이든 왜 이래? 잠깐만. 아, 왜 끊기기 시작했어 또?
People don't even think it's. I mean, there's some questions about GSX from the start, and he had run that up. The whole thing is crazy. So there's a reason you have to say you own more than 10% of something, right? Because you can get in trouble. So if you use these things and nobody knows, here we are again. I know what you're doing. Too big to fail two. You're gonna make it too big to fail 2 or TOO. What have you decided? These are swaps.
Square. Too big to fail squared with a little. But let's hope this isn't that. I know there's some people who think this is sort of a long-term capital style moment. I don't know if we're there yet, and
Maybe more Melvin capital style moment or something.
We can hope.
It's
On a relative
probably
basis,
why
well,
these margin calls were forced to begin with, right? To prevent something like this from getting bigger. The answer was no mas. You can't do this anymore. Take a look though, just at 2 months. We just showed it a second ago. If you look at the 2-month chart of Viacom and Discovery, you talk about these incredible declines, more than 50% in a week or something. But over the course of 2 months, this is the chart we were just looking at a second ago. Viacom's only down 2%. Discovery's actually up 3.6%. So this was a huge run up that came back really quickly. You're right to point it back to GameStop to say these are huge, huge moves that catch people on the top and on the bottom of these things. But going back 2 months, that's not much movement at all. So these are very recent, very rapid gains and losses.
I spoke to David a couple of weeks ago, and it was Bob, and I mean he was doing pretty well there for a while in terms of I asked him whether I can use the B word about him. I actually didn't. He deferred. He declined. He was very modest and humble about it. But I think maybe, but you had to be close probably, and then all of a sudden here today, gone tomorrow with Dick. But yeah, it's weird. This is not for Reddit traders this time, guys. It's not retail. Can't blame retail. Can't say that it's any type of chat room or Wall Street. That's mob or anything. This is once again one of the guys that you might think, what are you doing?
Well, how much do you think the Reddit trader though clearly played in? I think
to this
well, no, originally into the run-up
This is just straight up leverage and stupidity.
Of Viacom and of Discovery and of some of these other stocks. And you can argue, from what I understood talking to people over the weekend, Bill Wayne was a bit of a kind of a guy trying to ride some of the Reddit wave as well. So we've also often talked about the idea that hedge funds
On margin,
are involved in the Reddit trade, if you will. There are people effectively, I don't want to say taking advantage of the Reddit trade, but and not only investing alongside, but as Becky just said, with remarkable margin, and then you see what happens when these things come undone, and invariably they always do. The question is what really broke the camel's back. I would argue it was actually Viacom going out to the market, looking for cash, probably looking for too much cash, and that really was
that was a drop
the
of like
moment
27% that day.
아니 이게 왜 이렇게 끊겨?
said, we can't do this. And I think
끊기는 거 이거?
because they went for too much.
여러분 지금 화면이 끊겨요 안 끊겨요?
Start to talk to both the investor community that was getting the outreach from Morgan Stanley's and JP Morgan's and there was pressure on them to buy this stuff because there weren't enough investors, and I think that was actually the tip, if you will, to so many others to sell and to short the stock, and then it created this daisy chain effect.
I agree with you 100% that that's probably what kickstarted this whole thing. But if you look at the big run up there, like we say, oh, they were asking for too much, and that's why the stock sold off. That's justifying the run up that it's on the way up, which may be a little bit too generous to what we've seen with some of these things, because you probably do have some retail investors that get in there. It's hard to make the justification on the run up, just as much as it's hard to say, okay, why are they coming back so much? This is like as if these valuations can be completely justified at some of these levels. And what I will say is this is the same story again and again in terms of money and greed and liquidity and what you see with it. And it takes you back to Ben Franklin. I was like looking up Ben Franklin quotes this morning because he was right hundreds of years ago on all of these things. Remember that credit is money. Rather go to bed without dinner than to rise in debt. These same old lessons. It's all different flavors of it, but it's the same lesson learned again and again.
Great on the way up, leverage. I mean, think of that, 200 million to 15 billion in a family account. But then
That's what I thought. Like to have that much in a family account.
It's gone now. It's gone. I mean, did he ever? Really? This was, we'll get back to this. We got to figure out the stack. I guess that Viacom and CBS, Viacom and Discovery, that was like last week. I guess now we go on to some of the banks that are holding the bag.
We got to put Credit Suisse and Uber in there, I think. I put Viacom, I've been want to watch Viacom all week. I want to watch Discovery all week to figure out where that goes. Does it come back? Does it not?
But then beyond
Joe and I were
that,
talking about this though, and there's some of these charts in a stack, you can see the moves over a couple of days at a time, so it's hard to like capture it in the squawk stack sometimes.
we may have to tell people that if they want to know where the 10-year is, they got to look down on the bug and wait and see it, because it's not doing that much recently. So I'm sorry, but Alan Greenspan, you're gonna have to look elsewhere. It's weird because now we probably always need to have the Dow and the Nasdaq because they move. A lot of times they don't move in the same direction. And that was weird, wasn't it? While all this was happening, and that up 453 or whatever it was on Friday, that had something to do with all this too. That was indirectly because of this, which scares me. This isn't systemic or anything, do you think? This is not like a tremor, but it does, with all of GameStop and everything else, what are we doing with, where is fundamental investing? And is there anything left to it when no one's doing it anymore? But I don't think we need to read too much into it. Do we still about vaccines and reopenings and everything else? And getting cargo ships, out of the mud? Do that. Break down. The cargo ship, they're looking for high tide, maybe. That at least I was hoping it didn't crash. Yeah, that's what Brian Sullivan talked about for a while, and it did. Looks better, but so bigger than the Eiffel Tower and stuck in the muck. But it is unstuck, but not completely out of the way yet in the Suez Canal. Partially refloated after successful pulling and towing maneuvers. Officials say that its course has been corrected by about 80%. Further maneuvers will resume when the water level rises later in the day. And when the vessel is fully floated, it'll be moved to the lakes area for inspection, and traffic will open to other ships, not quite yet. One shipping director told CNBC Asia that the backlog has grown to about 300 ships waiting for passage through the canal, which usually handles about 50 ships per day. And we quickly learned that it's a long way around the to where you need to go. We take it for granted, I think. And then you got this thing. This is pretty funny.
Well, that brings us, you talk about the hundreds of ships that are still waiting on either side of the canal, and that brings us to the Suez traffic report.
Suez Canal traffic report ever given, ever stuck in just south of the fresh food market on 23 Jewel. Nothing doing north or south. Let's head to the north. You can see it's real heavy, especially as you get closer to Great Bitter Lake, where everyone's just stuck in bitter themselves. Heading up to the north, nothing doing here too. Breaks all the way up to the Port Said. Same to the south too. Suez Gulf looking pretty heavy, nowhere going anywhere. And this extends all the way up to the Red Sea.
That was John Hanson. He's the co-host of WCIU's The Jam TV program. He tweeted that out over the weekend and talked about how this was something that the former traffic reporter just couldn't resist. But it's actually pretty funny. You could play on all of these things, but no joke that this created a huge backlog just in shipping. And again, Joe, you mentioned this is stuff we take for granted. 12% of the world's cargo moves through there. 12%'s been stuck, and you are going to see the ripple effects lasting for weeks and weeks as the traffic starts moving again, and then you have backups at the ports, and then everything from there.
We did not see
on that.
the oil effect was not. The barrel is about $3. If you filled let me tell you that has not come home to roost yet. We do a lot more domestic production. Maybe that's why, but it used to be. If you ever years ago heard the Suez Canal was blocked, you'd think, I don't know, when you think the crude would be up above $100 a barrel, I would think, but that did
Most
not.
of the crude that was blocked there was on its way to Asia.
Didn't really happen. Coming up, what time is it? Wow, 6:15. That's a huge story, though. Crazy. One guy. Not even. The futures are under pressure. Not a lot. 130 points on the Dow. We'll get you ready for the trading week. Ahead, that's next. After Andrew does the taxi route.
Today's big number, 79%. That's the share of companies that plan to institute a hybrid work arrangement after the pandemic passes, according to a survey from Challenger Gray and Christmas.
아, 어. 오케이. 안 끊긴다 이제. 껐다 켰더니. 네. 껐다 켰더니 안 끊깁니다.
On Wall Street already, that's caught even professional traders as we saw with GameStop earlier in the year.
Do you think leverage or just the use of it and the availability of it, it increases with the easy money globally?
That certainly seems to be the case here, as the Wall Street Journal reported before, Mr. Wang was taking these very concentrated positions using leverage in a handful of Chinese tech companies, as well as, TV companies via the stock market.
So Barry, why shouldn't we think that everything's overheated, overcooked? When this is at the margin, obviously, but does it make you question just the level of the averages and other stocks?
It doesn't. I think that this is early cycle behavior. I don't think it's ring the bell at the end of the cycle, but look, there's unintended consequences of the Fed using their very blunt instruments to add a ton of liquidity to the system and pushing real rates to negative levels. I kind of view this as amateur hour on the street. I don't know how you allow someone to apply that much leverage to that type of positions. If you think about it, volatility adjusted, this is just a fantastic amount of leverage applied through swaps, getting around the whole 50% margin requirement. It's crazy. It's amateur hour on the street. It's poor risk management in the hedge fund community, as well would appear to be pretty poorly risk managed as well. But when I look at averages, like you, Joe, I kind of reached the conclusion fairly quickly that this is not systemic. It doesn't mark the end of the cycle. But listen, there's members of the Fed, Rob Kaplan is one in particular, that knows that there are unintended consequences and costs associated with this kind of interventions, and this may tangentially be one of them.
But as has been pointed out by and Discovery, kind of back to where they were before the crazy wild ride. If you were asleep or if you went on the Appalachian Trail for a couple of months, you wouldn't even know what happened. But doesn't this vary? I mean, it just seems like if you're someone that does gram and dive type investing, you can get caught up in this and decide your best efforts and get hurt. So it's just not good for what we think of as fundamental investing.
Yeah, I suppose, although the concepts and themes that I've been promoting to my clients, the reflation trade doesn't encompass this at all. I downgraded tech and telecom services this summer thinking that they were not going to be big beneficiaries through this cycle. I'm not in any of these positions, period. So I would think if you're approaching this from a business cycle perspective, this isn't what you would be on, what you would be in. If you're looking at the broader cycle like deglobalization, the struggles of the mercantilists in China, Germany, Japan, on a go-forward basis, because we have to deglobalize and have our supply chain stretched all over the world. Tanker the Suez Canal shuts down global trade. You wouldn't be in a lot of Chinese positions either. So, for me, I think if you're doing core fundamental analysis and thinking about this stuff, you wouldn't have been in these positions. But obviously, some people are.
Yeah, that's probably conjecture whether you agree, but eventually we get back to watching the 10-year, I would say, and the cases, variance, and we'll be back to that to decide really what happens, not this stuff.
Totally, that's a really good point. The past few weeks have been dominated by tracking the 10-year and seeing
yields kind of stoke mayhem in other parts of the market like stocks. And I think we will kind of go back to this back and forth between growth stocks and value and tracking that record divergence that's really taken place with value stocks outperforming growth by the biggest margin since 2001. And I do think that will take center stage again, though this really is the latest wild card for markets right now.
So it really doesn't feel like a long-term capital or a bank systemic problem for banks that are at this point. All right. No, okay. All right, Barry. Thanks, Gunjan. Thank you.
트비님 안녕하세요.
Both on this morning. In fact,
트비님 안녕하세요. 반갑습니다.
we seem to talk about a lot of crazy stuff every day. So I don't know.
We haven't talked about NFTs yet. I mean,
Yeah,
we will. We will. We will. Coming up on the other side of the break, we're going to go live to Beijing for a look at how U.S. companies are handling inflamed China. As we head to a break, an update on U.S. vaccinations. The good news, more than 6.5 million doses were given out on Saturday and Sunday. Now, half of all American adults over the age of 65 are fully vaccinated. That means that they got the second shot they were taking two. Dr. Scott Gottlieb will join us in the next hour to talk about all of it. Scott returns after this.
트비님 운동하셨어요 오늘? 아우. 브라인 뱅서님 치팅밀에 대해서 대화하시네요. 9시 할 게임이나 치팅밀? 치팅밀은 저는 그렇게 생각해요. 치팅밀 all inclusive vacation 멕시코 살면서 가잖아요. 1년에 한 번, 몇 년에 한 번. 네. 나쁜 거 아니잖아요. 네. 그런 거. 너무 자주 하면 안 되고. 그러니까 내가 평상시 치팅, 속이다라는 거잖아. 속이다. 네, 속이다. 내가 평상시 하지 않았던 행동을 가끔 하는 거. 네? 너무 무리가 가면 해로운 거고. 저는 치팅밀이 없어요. 평상시 다이어트가 너무 마음에 들어서 치팅밀이 없어요. 네. 저는 매일 먹고 싶은 걸 다 먹어서 따로 치팅밀을 할 필요가 없어요. 매일 먹고 싶은 거 다 먹어요. 그게 저의 치팅밀에 대한 저의 생각입니다. 왜 굳이 치팅밀을 해요? 왜 내가 평상시에 먹고 싶은 걸 다 먹으면 되지. 저는 매일 먹고 싶은 거 다 먹어요.
Hi,
the alleged human rights abuses in China's far west region of Xinjiang. And with all of the calls to boycott brands like Nike and H&M, we decided to go down to a popular shopping district here in Beijing to see what's going on. And what we found was that H&M was really, really quiet. There were very few customers. The Swedish retailer is the primary focus and target of the Chinese outrage ever since.
수빈님 9시에 운동하면 너 늦는 거 아니에요? 저녁에 너무 운동하면 잠자기 어려울 텐데.
Xinjiang cotton because of reports of forced labor in the production of it. Those, of course, are allegations that the Chinese government has been denying.
뱅손님은 어떻게 생각하세요?
This year, though a staffer did tell us that
뱅손님은 치팅에 대해서 어떻게 생각하세요?
controversy began, and we spoke to a number of customers, but because of the political sensitivity, nobody would agree to come on camera. For us, off camera, though, the responses were mixed. For the most part, most people said that they were feeling pressure
뱅손님
not
어떻게
to buy
생각하세요?
the targeted brands. So they said that instead they would buy Chinese or alternative foreign brands. And then we also learned that Nike has a very strong following. So if you are a brand with a strong, loyal fan base, then what they were telling us is that they were either going to delay their purchases, maybe for a month or so when all the controversy blows down or comes down, or buy online so they wouldn't be seen at the shop.
뱅손님은 어떻게 생각하십니까? 치팅에 대해서?
Because Nike, for example, is a huge employer of Chinese people here, and that was another theme that we heard. One staffer at the Nike store said that she's really worried about her job, and because Nike does employ so many people, the Chinese government has to be careful because there could be a negative impact on the economy. So I think this kind of shows one way in which foreign companies can push back despite all of this rhetoric.
Fascinating. Have we? And Nike's not saying anything, obviously.
No, most of the companies have not been saying anything. In fact, they've been shying away from commenting at all because some of the staff have actually been verbally abused online, and that's because Nike has a way of trying to reach out to customers. They actually live stream, so some of those staff members have been told that they are traitors. It's a very hot button issue. I think what was also interesting is
배고프면
that the Chinese
배고프면
government
식사를 하세요.
the U.S.'s allegations that this whole
배고프면 식사를 하세요.
foreign brands is
저는 체중에 신경 안 써요.
the government here said that
운동 열심히 하고 몸에서 필요한 걸 충분히 먹으면 체중은 알아서 됩니다.
don't like this
운동을 많이 하고 먹고 싶은 그 몸에서 필요한 걸 먹으면 전 체중이 늘어나고요.
really fascinating.
그러니까 몸은 저는 항상
Was that
이 정도 컨디션이에요.
they don't even understand
1년 내내.
what the controversy is all about.
운동 열심히 하고 먹고 싶은 걸 다 먹으면 저는 체중이 늘어나면서 이 상태고 운동을 덜 열심히 하면서 먹고 싶은 걸 먹으면 체중이 줄어들면서 이 상태예요.
So I think that also shows the challenge that foreign companies face because of this very closed information and environment.
영어 잘하고 싶어요, 저.
You in Beijing this morning, your evening for us. Thanks. We'll talk to you soon. Becky?
Thanks, Andrew. When we come back,
저
chip shortage.
팟캐스트 초대받았어요. 그 전 세계에서 괜찮은 짐들 대상으로 해서 어떻게 비즈니스 운영하는지, 네, 이 코로나에서 어떻게 살아남았는지 팟캐스트 초대받았어요.
Automakers, what it means for consumers, and how long it might last. Right now, though, as we head to a break, a quick business travel news item for you. United Airlines began operating yesterday in New York's JFK Airport for the first time in more than 5 years. Carriers taking advantage of a lull in air travel to try and snag space at the once congested airport. It's going to be flying 5 flights.
JFK 에어포트 가봤거든요. 엄청 커.
Bucks will be right back.
여러분, 저 올해 세계 여행 가요. 저 올해 은퇴합니다. 저 올해 여기 풀타임 은퇴해서 올해 세계 여행 가요. 그래서 되게 기대돼요 지금. 올해 세계 여행 갑니다. 세계 여행 갑니다. 세계 여행 가요. 다리라 다라라 세계 여행을 가요. 라리라 라라 라리라라라 라라 라리라 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 세계 여행 갑니다. 여행가 목표는 68. 여러분 근데 여러분 다이어트 하는데 배가 고플 일이 뭐가 있어요? 체지방 3% 될 것도 아닌데 그러지 않아요? 그냥 건강한 걸 드시면 음식을 절제하지 않으셔도 됩니다. 저는 진짜 배부르게 충분히 먹어요. 항상. 배가 고플 일이 뭐가 있어요? 체지방 3% 될 것도 아닌데 이 정도 체지방은 배가 안 고파도 돼요.
Mark, I think the thing that shocked me the most was hearing that the Ford F-150 line was going to be shut down through this weekend because that is one of the most profitable lines at the company. That tells you a little bit about how big of a problem this is. What are you seeing overall right now?
Well, overall, obviously, we're seeing a shortage in the semiconductors. And initially, when this problem surfaced a couple of months ago, the automakers were playing a little bit of triage, which was let's protect the high-margin products like pickup trucks, large SUVs. And as you've seen over the last week or so, you've seen, GM shut down their compact pickup truck lines. You've seen other big SUV lines go down. You mentioned Ford with their F-150 coming down for a couple of days. So this is a serious issue. And when you look at the impact on the industry compared to last year with COVID, last year, Becky, the industry lost between probably 2 and 2.5 million units of production. It's estimated that in the first quarter of this year, the industry is going to lose about 1 million units of production. And if you assume the peak of the shutdown,
맹성님 일주일에 운동 몇 번 하세요?
that could be another 1 million units plus or minus. So you're rapidly approaching the impact from COVID of last year. And I think automakers are assuming that they can make some of that production up in the second half. But that's going to be that's going to be touch and go given the supply chain.
I mean, I had been thinking about buying a new car at some point. I've missed my opportunity, right? Because if there's less supply out there, there's probably a whole lot more demand from people who didn't buy cars last year. What's that add up to in terms of prices that consumers can expect to pay?
Well, you can always still buy a car. Depends on what you want to pay for it. But the inventory situation was tight before the semiconductor shortage. It's even tighter now. And what you're seeing is last month in February, for example, you saw average transaction prices the highest they've ever been, approaching $38,000. You'll probably see when the numbers come in for March in the next couple of days another record set. So what consumers are going to see is not a lot of inventory on the lots, and they're going to pay more for what they thought they could get. The good news is when they go to trade in their vehicle, they're going to get a very good price because it's hard to find good used cars right now. So that'll be somewhat of an offset for consumers.
저는 자동차를 2012년도에 첫 차가 엘란트라, 그 다음에 기아 소울, 그다음 투싼. 네, 이렇게 한국차만 타고 있어요. 한국차가 가격대에 비해서 최고로 좋은 차 같아요. 정말로. 가격대에 비해서 최고로 좋은 차 뭐라고 생각하세요? 저는 한국차. 가격대 비해서.
Well, it's all about, how you project demand. And listen, when COVID happened a year ago, all the automakers cut their production schedules, which in turn then cut their orders from their suppliers, who actually deal with the semiconductor companies directly. The OEMs really don't have, or the automakers don't have many relationships with the chip makers. That's done through their suppliers. So they cut the forecast because the economy shut down. Then we saw a V-shaped recovery in the auto industry as lockdowns started to lift. And, in the auto industry, it's all just-in-time delivery, right? It relies on very precise and undisrupted supply scheduling. And so that really hit the market. And what you're seeing now going forward is not only the chip shortage, Becky, but you're seeing almost a perfect storm of a few other things, like there was a fire at a company called Renesas, which is a Japanese semiconductor maker that primarily serves the auto industry, a couple of weeks ago. So it'll take 30 days to do their repairs and then 30 days to ramp up. You had the Texas winter storm that shut down the electrical system there. So that really stopped the flow of petrochemical-based materials such as coatings and resins, and that's important for seat foams and things of that nature for seats in cars. Of course, now you have the Suez Canal, right, which is really going to impact particularly European automakers and their suppliers. And then finally, once this starts flowing again, you have huge port congestion around the world, as well as a shortage of shipping containers. And so you're going to continue to see this impact the industry to one degree or another for the remainder of the year.
Wow. Let's hope that's the last leg of this perfect storm. But Mark, it's great to see you. Thank you for your time this morning.
All right, thank you, Becky.
Coming up, Saturday Night Live. Fungible tokens over the weekend. We'll take a look at that. Plus, much more on the margin call that sent margin calls that sent shockwaves through the markets. Full breakdown of that story. Coming up. We'll be right back.
따라리라 랄랄라 뚜뚜루뚜루뚜루 따라리라 라랄랄라
Son, I didn't
따라리라라.
understand a word you just said.
Hey, thanks. Kate McKinnon playing Janet Yellen in that skit, and Pete Davidson playing, I don't know, Batman, Robin, something.
Eminem.
But I don't.
Eminem.
Eminem. But yes, Eminem. But yes. So very funny. I don't know if you saw the other one, by the way, about Boomer. Did you see the Boomer?
Loved that one. Yeah, because I sent it to Scott Gottlieb. He hadn't seen it. He made a cameo in that. He hadn't seen it before. But that one was really very funny.
Maybe we'll play Boomers later. We come back on the other side of this. The development story you're going to be hearing about all day. We're going to dig into the fallout from this massive margin call on Archegos.
여러분 무리하지 마세요. 뭐든지 무리하지 마세요. 운동이든 영양이든 투자든 너무 무리하지 마세요. 너무 무리하지 마세요. 약물이든 너무 무리하지 마세요. 너무 무리하지 마세요. 지나친 너무 무리하지 마세요. 체중 감량 다이어트 근육 증가등 너무 무리하지 마세요. 그러다 큰일 납니다. 너무 무리하지 마세요. 그러다 큰일 납니다. 너무 무리하지 마세요.
Stocks last week linked to margin calls and the liquidation of positions held by Archegos Capital, a legacy media company. Discovery, Icon, CBS fell sharply Friday and for the week. Chinese internet stocks, including Baidu, Tencent, and Vipja, also caught up in all of the selling. Check out the moves now in credit Credit Suisse and Nomura overnight. We're hearing that they're saying that they're going to take significant hits, and those stocks down 15 and 16% respectively. Myron McDonald is here this morning, editor of the Bear Traps Report, a CNBC contributor. Good morning to you. We've been talking all morning about this remarkable margin call, one of them perhaps an historic one. The question is, are there going to be ripple effects, Larry?
Well, Andrew, we run a Bloomberg chat with institutional investors. We have a live chat with about 1,000 institutions there. And on Friday, the confusion of what the banks were exposed to was just exploding in our chat. And kind of like behind the scenes, there's a hypothecation going on where there's a lot more leverage, and the banks are unsure as to which one is on the hook for some of the liabilities. So yeah, there'll be ripple effects for sure.
But how significant should we be thinking about this? Is this a one-off situation? We were saying, is this Melvin capital or is it long-term capital?
Well, as you laid out beautifully in Fail, I mean, 10, 12 years ago, all of the leverage, Andrew, all the leverage was on the bank side. Now, all that leverage, there's a metamorphosis, there's a serpent through the last 100 years in financial crises, and that serpent has just transferred the leverage over from the sell side banks to the buy side hedge funds. And so you think about the last year. A year ago, nobody talks about this, but that relative value hedge fund blow up in March was all leverage. You're talking about 20 times leverage trades in that one, and that was interest rate derivatives. And then you had Melvin, and then you had Greensill, and then you have Archegos. So you've had 4 in 1 year. The serpent in the market is coming out, and unfortunately, regulators are, it's the bad news Bears versus New York Yankees. The regulators are just 2 to 3 steps behind.
Larry, when you look at the rise in the stock price, for example, of a Viacom CBS or a Discovery, or some of the stocks that we've been attributing the rise to the Reddit crowd, is it in fact the Reddit crowd, or is it in fact Bill Wang leveraged, 5 to 1?
Credit to you for that, because the viewers watching us right now were, I don't want to deceive, but it was not David versus Goliath in January with, the Reddit crowd. It was Goliath versus Goliath with David along for the ride. And what is happening here is you've got some really slimy companies with horrible financials, and then you've got these players that are using just obscene leverage to run those stocks up and take out short sellers. And as Larry McCarthy once said, I talked about in my book, The Colossal Failure of Common Sense, if you take out the short sellers, the problem is you take out the speed bumps on the way down, and it's very unhealthy for the market because you don't have that hit on the way down. So it's very, very disturbing.
Okay, so you mentioned the regulators. You also mentioned this idea of obscene leverage. Let's talk about the folks who are providing the obscene leverage. In this case, it looks like Credit Suisse, Nomura. Are we going to be hearing from other banks? Obviously, Goldman Sachs clearly pushed for the margin call. Do we believe that they have any exposure, or do any of the other banks have exposure?
Well, one of the things we put out in our Bear Traps report over the weekend was the credit default swaps on Morgan Stanley relative to, say, Goldman Sachs, and Credit Suisse relative to, say, JP Morgan. There was a disturbing widening late last week. So once again, you have something going on there. Now, it's not like 2008, there's no way, I'm not going to, but it's the beginning of something. So you want to watch the credit risk. It's credit leads equities. And I suspect it's a lot bigger behind the scenes in terms of trying to figure out where this is. Essentially, you got to remember, this is just one or two small players who are able to manipulate the banks. I think the biggest question for our viewers looking forward is this is going to bring a possible leveraging into the system where if two small players can manipulate big bank balance sheets this much, then there has to be a whole review of the back office.
We're going to have to run in a minute, but here's the question to me. It's not clear to me that all of the banks that were lending money to Bill Wang understood that they were all lending money around the same companies, the same stocks. Do you think that there's going to be a relook now by the banks at all of the clients in terms of how these total return swaps are working?
Yeah, this total return swap thing is just another invention, another innovation. The way it's used in this case is just spectacular abuses. And it reminds me, when I was a young kid, I learned about leverage. There was a person in my neighborhood that had his father gave him a nice car, and he took it around to 7 different banks, maybe $60,000, $70,000 car in the 90s, and he borrowed, $30,000, $20,000 from 6 different banks against the same car. These tricks have been going on for years, but now hedge funds are using some of these techniques in family offices, and the problem is you just can't quantify the damage until weeks later.
And why the banks are not doing the diligence, is a real question that I'm sure regulators and others are going to be asking and looking for. Larry, great to see you this morning. Thank you for helping us try to understand. It seems like a hard to understand situation. Talk to you soon. Thanks.
Andrew, these are excellent questions. I can't wait till we can dig deeper into it. That disclosure, what you do with all these things, this is what the regulators are going to start talking about. Anyway, when we come back, some breaking news from Southwest Airlines, adding 100 new Boeing orders. Phil LeBeau has the details right after this break.
너무 꽉 좀 했나? 숨쉬기 불편해.
Stock futures lower after the S&P closes at a record high on Friday. What you need to watch ahead of the opening bell, that's coming up straight ahead. Canal chaos. A massive container ship stranded in the Suez, finally breaking free of the shore just hours ago. But problems remain. We've got the details. And media mayhem. How a relatively unknown hedge fund caused what some are calling a once-in-a-decade margin call that rocked the markets. The latest on what investors should know about the Archegos fire sale as the second hour of Squawk Box begins right now.
Good morning and welcome back to
Southwest Airlines will be placing with Boeing. It is for 100 737 MAX 7 airplanes, 30 of which, the first 30 of which will be delivered next year. There is also an option to take delivery of 155 more over the next decade, bringing the total list price investment for Southwest Airlines in new 737 MAXs to more than $10 billion. But let's be clear here. Southwest is not paying the list price for these aircraft. They're often sold, they're always sold at a substantial discount that no doubt will be part of the ultimate price tag here, but still a multi-billion-dollar order for Southwest Airlines. When it is completed, it will have 349 737 MAXs in its fleet by 2031. They are taking delivery of 28 more this year, so they will have 69 737 MAXs in the fleet flying around the country by the end of this year. Again, the total number of new 737 MAXs Southwest is ordering will be 100 by 2031, and a total of 349 737 MAXs in the fleet over the next decade. A huge deal, not a surprise, guys, given the fact that Southwest was looking to upgrade its fleet. A bit of a defeat for Airbus because it was an indication within the market that Southwest was considering the Airbus A220, but it has decided as it goes with this smallest version of the 737 MAXs, which seats about 150 passengers, it will be going with the 737 MAX 7. Obviously, a big deal, a big relief for Boeing. Southwest, a 737 only aircraft, or airline, I should say. It has always flown only 737. That will continue. Guys, back to you.
Yeah, hoping the Dow out a little bit. That 7-point move in Boeing this morning, pairing some of those losses as well. Thanks, Phil. The next story we've been focusing on Viacom, CBS, and Discovery among the names, media and technology names, facing a big sell-off last week. The reason, tens of billions of dollars worth of block trade offered at fire sale prices due to the unwinding of positions from a firm called Archegos Capital Management. Notorious individual at the center of things. Maybe that's too much, but a controversial figure. Leslie Picker, not you, Mr. Wang.
Yeah, I would hope I'm not the controversial figure, but I think it's fair to say that he certainly is the center of this Archegos Capital Management, the center of the story of the morning, which one source described the size and scale of Friday's forced sales as a once-in-a-decade event. It all started first thing Friday morning when Goldman Sachs sent a note to clients offering block trades in several Chinese internet names at steep discounts. These included Baidu, Tencent Music, and VipShop, among other names. But throughout the day, the stock sales kept coming. Discovery, Farfetch, GSX, Viacom, all offered at those steep discounts. So quickly, traders across Wall Street scrambled to figure out what exactly was going on. And ultimately, sides pointed to that little-known firm called Archegos Capital Management. That's a family office managed by Bill Huang. CNBC reported over the weekend that the firm faced a forced liquidation on several over-levered positions. Archegos did not respond to our requests seeking comment. But still, the Wall Street Journal reported that Archegos runs a concentrated, highly levered book and holds some positions through swaps. Now, these derivatives aren't disclosed, so now traders are trying to figure out where else Huang was exposed. Potential volatility today as a result of that uncertainty. Now, the situation is also raising other questions, and you guys have been chatting about this all morning, about risk in the system. Huron and Credit Suisse both warned that they could face material losses due to transactions with the U.S. client that sources are pointing toward Archegos. With that, it's unclear how other banks might be impacted and whether the pain will spread to other hedge funds, potential contagion in the system as well.
A lot of people just calling it another example of over leverage. It cuts both ways. If you go
La 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 la.
Right, exactly.
Andrew.
Hey, Leslie, as I was calling around over the weekend, you obviously were hearing that Credit Suisse was going to be hit. By this. Do we think that this extends out and there's additional pain for some people, especially for frankly, in operate.
La
In
la
fact,
la
leverage the link, but there may be others.
So it's interesting, Bloomberg reported this morning that Goldman does not believe that it will have material risk as a result of this, but it appears that their overall risk, as we know right now, we don't know exactly how they were exposed, was as a result of kind of facilitating these block trades. Now that type of role tends to be a little less risky unless the stock price just plummets, holding on to those block trades before you can offload them. And it's unclear also exactly what Credit Suisse and Nomura were doing, although it appears that they had a counterparty role and therefore were on the hook when some of these unwinds were happening. Now that's what it appears, just kind of reading through the tea leaves, reading through the press releases. So the type of role that each of these banks provided is a little bit different, therefore the risk exposure is different. But I think that's going to be a key question to look for today, is exactly what the contagion looks like across the U.S. banks on Wall Street. Now, the market seems to be hoping that there could be some significant pain. Obviously, we saw the shares of Nomura and Credit Suisse, but Goldman is still down today, despite the fact that there is that story out there saying that the bank doesn't believe it will face material losses as a result of this.
Leslie, the other big question is what happens to stock buybacks that are in the works and planned on this? Because Bank of America downgraded Credit Suisse on this because they say all of these things add up to something that they think will directly impact the potential abilities to buy back, will directly impact the buyback of shares there. And I think that's a big question too. How much does this eat into the capital cushion that the banks have and that will then be able to turn around and use to buy back shares?
Absolutely, and at least according to the Credit Suisse statement, it doesn't appear that they have at least are willing to disclose a sense of what those losses could look like. No meaning they said it was $2 billion, but you're right, you have to put aside some kind of cash in order to cover those losses, which could remove that cash from some other uses for it, such as potential buybacks and things of that nature. So, both firms were with the Federal Reserve with regard to their capital cushion previously, but of course, if you have to set aside additional cash to cover potential losses from transactions with a U.S. client, that totally changed the picture, and it may require them to take money that would be used for other sources in order to cover those losses.
Leslie, thanks a lot. This is a story we'll be talking about all morning and all day. In fact, our media analyst Richard Gill's going to be joining us to talk more about the move that we've seen in the media stocks. Andrew?
Thanks, Max. And on a cargo ship, which we've been talking about for quite some time now, stuck in the Suez Canal and blocking traffic, causing shipping prices and inside the global supply chain. But this morning, a little bit of good news reports that the ship has started its engine loaded NBC's Dan Murphy joins us now on the Squawk News Line with the latest. Dan.
Hey there, Andrew. Well, I'm looking at the ship right now from the village on the banks of the Suez Canal here in Egypt, and I can tell you, look, just in the past, we have seen movement here, and that's really good news. Almost a week after this massive ship got stuck in one of the most critical oil waterways. What we have learned today is that they've been able to partially refloat the ship. They've been able to swing the stern that's the ship more than 100 meters from the shore, so that's a positive development too. It seems to be pointing also in the right direction now, and progress is also being made to get the 700,000-ton ship unstuck and to get the Suez Canal moving again. Two things I wanted to flag for you. The first is the asset price reaction. Oil prices initially fell on this news. Of course, the Suez accounts for about 5 to 10% of seaborne oil and LNG trade, so this development was initially bearish, but we're starting to see that reverse. And the other thing is the political reaction. Only a short time ago, President Sisi declaring victory here, saying that the crisis is over. So, look, that might be a little bit premature at this stage, but it has been absolutely a marathon effort to get this far. Over the weekend, we saw dredgers using really sophisticated equipment to pump about 27,000 cubic meters of sand and clay from underneath the ship. We've seen diggers that have been excavating the bow, that's the front, and more than a dozen tugboats here as well, all on hand to push this ship, despite the fact that it's being weighed down by a full load here of almost 20,000 sea containers on top. So, look, just a couple of questions to be answered here. We don't know how soon the wave's going to be able to open again with traffic. We don't know how long it's going to take to get even out. Of course, the latest report suggests that there's about 400 ships fully loaded with cargo still waiting to pass through the able to do so because the other given has been blocking their path. And the other thing we're looking out for now is exactly what happens next. Where does finger of blame pointed? An investigation into how the ship came to be stuck is also now underway. Authorities looking at a number of factors here, like piracy, for example, speed, pilot error, maybe assistance failure. All areas of this inquiry right now, but ultimately all of this really just underscoring just how vital this is to global seaborne trade and the 20,000 or so that pass through each year, delivering us billions of dollars worth of goods to the world. Back over to you.
Dan Murphy, thank you. With your eyes actually on the ship itself, appreciate it. Becky?
Thanks, Andrew. When we come back, a shift in the way executives are battling cyber threats and what it means for U.S. companies. Before we head to a break, though, let's get a check on the markets this morning. You saw the Dow, the S&P 500, the Dow Transports all set new highs on Friday. This morning, Dow indicated down by about 107 points. S&P futures down by 10. The NASDAQ just at the flat line right now. Squawk Box will be right back.
자, 여러분 어제 말씀드렸듯이 중량을 많이 안 들면 여러분 세트를 많이 하는 방법이 몸이 좋아지는 방법이 여러분 굉장히 무겁게 들면 운동을 한 30분만 해도 되지만 우리 같은 일반인들은 굉장히 무겁게 안 드니까 운동을 빨리 좋아지려면 많이 해야 돼요. 제가 이제 토론토가 몸이 따뜻해지는 관계로 상의를 탈의하고 돌아다닐 확률이 높아지고 요새 뭐 같은 행사도 많아져서 몸을 좀 만들어야 될 것 같아서 네, 운동을 좀 열심히 하기로 마음을 먹었어요. 이번 주부터. 네. 여러 가지 행사가 좀 있어서 몸을 좀 만들려고 합니다. 몸을 만들어야 해. 몸을 만들어야 해. 저는 유산소 운동을 하지 않습니다. 그 힘으로 차라리 중량을 들겠습니다. 네. 유산소 운동 할 힘으로 이런 거 하세요. 자, 이렇게 해야 되겠다. 왔다 갔다 귀찮아. 어차피 얼굴 표정도 찡그릴 텐데 벽 보고 해야지. 여러분, 벽 보고 하겠습니다. 벽 보고 해야지.
Executives have a new worry keeping them up at night, and that is state-sponsored cyber warfare. David Jammers doing this right now. From a CNBC Technology Executive Council.
CNBC Technology.
Yeah, that's right, Andrew. We're seeing a shift in the way that technology executives perceive the threats in cyberspace, and it mirrors what we've seen going on in the news more generally. According to the first quarter CNBC Technology Executive Council survey, concerns about state-sponsored cyber threats remain high. 48% of those surveyed said that's the most dangerous threat to their organization. That number was at 50% in the fourth quarter and just 20% in the third quarter of last year. So you can see how it spiked and has remained elevated since that SolarWinds hack during the winter time last year. Now 10% said individual hackers were the most dangerous cyber threat, and 35% said employee mistakes were the most dangerous.
And these concerns are going all the way to the top. 74% said their board has had a formal discussion about the Solar Winds Act, and an additional 10% said they haven't done that yet, but it is on the agenda for their next meeting. And we asked them how they think government is doing in responding to the Solar Winds Act. Average got the largest response at 45%, 23% said poor, and 0% here said excellent. That's not a number you see often in polling. So this is a group that's not been inspired by what it's seen from Uncle Sam. Guys, this is just a snapshot of what the industry is thinking. There are 31 members here responding at the Tech Executive Council. They're all high-ranking tech officers in their companies. So back over to you.
Actually, Emma, stay right there. We're going to continue this discussion. For more on this, let's welcome Sue Gordon. She served as the Principal Deputy Director of Intelligence in the Obama administration, and she's now a CNBC creator. And Sue, just looking at this, I mean, it's kind of overwhelming. The head of a company that is being attacked by a nation state, what are you supposed to do? It's pretty overwhelming.
Good morning, Becky. And in a way, I'm part of the tech executives. They have it like cyber threats are both the alligator closest to and this is significant strategic threat. These two last attacks showed that nation-state actors are willing to attack non-governmental entities as a
장갑 껴도 손바닥 아픈 이 느낌 좋다.
And even though these two have been largely about intelligence gathering or
장갑
espionage,
껴도
it doesn't stop there. It doesn't have to stop there.
손바닥 아픈 이 느낌 너무 좋아.
We'll talk about the government in a minute. You know, I'm perfectly willing to be critical of the entity that I've been a part of for most of my career. But I don't think this is something where we want to wait for the government to be good. Companies, reputations, operations, and then their contribution to national security are all at risk. And so there are some pretty clear things they need to do. Eamon mentioned one that they're recognizing. They need to have C-suite discussions about the value and risk in their organization. I'd even suggest that they exercise at the board level, at the senior level, a cyber attack. They also need to add more talent, not just the boards, to get more tech-savvy, cyber-savvy people sitting in that boardroom, but they also have to add it to their information technology teams, because this isn't just about running a network. This is about the ability to do some forensics. And finally, they really, really need to ensure that they're making it hard for adversaries by reducing the complexity of the networks, layer security controls, and know their data and systems.
Yeah, obviously, employers are concerned, and they know that the mistakes that their employees might make are one of the things that they're most worried about. So point made that they need to be watching things at home and really ramping things up for some sort of self-reliance. But what is the government doing? Is it safe to assume that they are doing more things than they are going to do?
손바닥 아파. 이거 까지겠네.
If we've got nation states that are attacking us, how do we go back at them?
Yeah, so one, this is hard. And it's hard because our adversaries well know that there are protections in place that limit the ability of the federal government to go trooping in to the private sector. So that's
굳은 살 뜯길 수도 있을 것 같아 이거 뭐 살점 떨어지는데 어떡하냐?
the last 2 years.
발을 바꿀까 이러면?
Trump administration and the first year, the beginnings of the Biden administration, a real focus on this, starting with the cyber Solarium report, and now with the positioning of people.
이게
in the White
고링이
House.
많이
There are
들어가서
things the government needs to
아,
do
이렇게
now.
하네.
We need to get on our horse and really form a focal point. Someone that is responsible for this issue of cybersecurity for the nation. They need to set some security standards. We just don't have them. It's time to put them in place.
제가 지금 하는 운동이 뭐냐면 여러분 전완근하고 승모근 운동하고 있어요.
We don't talk about the limitations of the private sector and information sharing, but we need to really look at how we get our best cyber defenders playing on this private sector field. So I see a lot of activity. I would say the private sector, my companies, really need to put pressure on it and need to be leaders in terms of demanding that we have collective defense, be willing to share information about attacks. You have Congress get in there and provide some incentives and protections. But if we don't share all the information we have, the government has too small a social strong to do all the protection.
Amy, you've been following this for a very long time, cybersecurity. What do you think about the risk to companies right now and any potential cooperation with government?
이거
It's higher
누가
than we've ever
뜯어지면
seen
큰일 나는데.
right? I mean, and the
되게 아픈데.
cooperation piece is still just not there. A lot of companies are just not disclosing that they've been hit. We know that thousands of companies have been impacted by these recent attacks, but we've only seen maybe dozens of disclosures of those attacks. So a lot of companies are still hiding the ball from the public, and we're told from the government because of fears of liability, reputational damage, all of those things that business executives are going to deal with. Now, I've actually got a question for Sue because Sue, we saw a bunch of intelligence officials up on Capitol Hill talking about one of the big problems that they deal with is the fact that the NSA, which is, as you talk about our best cyber troops, those are sort of our best players. They're prohibited by law from looking at U.S. servers because they're designed to look overseas only, and there are good and right privacy reasons why that is. But the bad thing is they're able to rent servers in the United States from well-known American server farms and launch their attacks from inside the United States. Do we need to either allow the NSA to look inside the United States, which would be a whole other question, or do we need to have some
이거 얼마 되지도 않는 거 이렇게 하는 것도 힘드네.
sort of a know your customer type regulation, the same way we have with banks, saying you're going to lease out this space, you need to know who you're leasing it out to, and you need to be able to tell the government you're not selling this space to hackers.
Yeah, Andrew, I think you have it about right. Number one, on the question of NSA being able to have different authorities that allow them to look in the United States, I think that is a really serious question. We need to look at it. In general, I'm opposed to escalating government authorities, but we ought to look at it because it is an unfair fight that we have nation-state actors attacking U.S. companies. I also think you're right that we need to get Congress to establish some protections or incentives for the data sharing, and I think one of the considerations is exactly what you said, this know your customer. This really has to be collective defense. There isn't a way for the U.S. government to alone protect this, but we're not doing enough shared work, and I think that's where the government, the Congress, and the companies have got to come together.
So thanks for your time this morning, and Eamon, good to see you.
Thanks, Becky. So look at what's moving in the pre-market. Check out Bitcoin this morning. Last week, remember, it's all over the place. It was almost 60,000, but all the way down to 50,300 today. It's up $2,500, 4.5% back to 57. And change. Talk about it right now.
손바닥. 오, 어떻게 이거? 큰일 나. 이거 거의 뜯어지려고 그래. 이거 어떡하냐 이거? 큰일 났는데 이게 살 좀 뜯어지면 엄청 아파요. 그래서 이거 안 되는데.
Welcome back to Squawk Box. I am Dominic Chu with your market minute on this eventful morning so far. We want to focus in on what's happening with some of the action in these Chinese big tech internet-related issues coming out the liquidation reportedly of positions at Archegos or linked to Archegos Capital. Now take a look at the two of the ETFs that track some of the Chinese markets. First of all, the iShares China Large Cap ETF, or FXI, and the Crane Shares CSI China Internet ETF, which is KWEB, KWEB. Over the course of the last, call it month or so, the Crane Shares China Internet really has taken a huge move lower compared to the rest of the Chinese market overall. Now, a lot of that has to do with government crackdowns on some of their tech companies, and of course, what we saw this past week with some of those liquidation trades that we've been talking about all so far this morning. Checking out some of the names specifically and how far they've fallen. Take a look at Baidu, VIP shops, and 10-cent music. On a year-to-date basis, a couple of these are still positive, but just look at the steep drop-offs that we've seen here. In the case of VIP Shop and 10-cent, we're talking about like 40% moves from their recent highs down to their intraday lows at one point here, so keep an eye on those. But of course, all of this does create some kind of an opportunity at some point. Take a look at the pre-market action so far. Some traders are at least stepping to buy some of the dip in this. Baidu and VIP Shop and 10-cent music, each of these at some point over the course of Friday either traded through or down close to their long-term 200-day average price. So you can see there are 1% gains there for Baidu, 1.75% gains for VIP Shops, and 10-cent music up 7% because they are engaging in a $1 billion share buyback, taking advantage of that recent weakness you've seen there. And of course, some of the other names tied to this trade. Viacom CDS up 2%, Discovery up 4.5%. Meanwhile, Credit Suisse and Nomura, two of the banks reportedly may be involved in some of this liquidation trade to the downside here. So Becky, keep an eye on those names. I'll send things back over to you.
Tom, thank you. When we come back, Dr. Scott Gottlieb on the latest rise in COVID cases amid states that are lifting restrictions. Plus, last week's sell-off in media names like Viacom, CBS, and Discovery due in part to that forced liquidation of positions held by Archegos Capital. We'll speak to media analyst Richard about the move in the media stocks. Squawk Box will be right back.
Oh. Woo.
Scott Gottlieb, former FDA commissioner, serves on the boards of Illumina, Pfizer, also a CNBC contributor. And Doctor, we're going to talk in a second about some troubling numbers in New Jersey, Maine, and New York, and where that's from. And even after quite a bit of the progress in the vaccines, it's a little troubling to see those rise. But you have an op-ed piece today, and I'm just wondering how that happened, because your piece, it's very similar to the lead-in op-ed piece in the middle. It's not exactly the same, but both pieces are talking about intellectual property and the inclination to actually, I guess, get around patent protection for drug companies that develop these things. And your view is that we should actually take a lesson from how George W. Bush, I guess, was 43. 43? Yeah, 43 in terms of HIV and effort there, where they didn't really break patents. They kind of worked with the pharmaceutical companies, and there's some parallels to what we're hearing now from the left, the global left, and from the WTO about these COVID vaccines.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the pieces are a coincidence. What the World Trade Organization and some nations want to do right now, or some people in the WTO, is basically get the U.S. to agree that it's not going to enforce patents on the vaccine as a way to potentially increase global supply of vaccines. It's really a hollow promise, because the reality is, even if the manufacturers like Pfizer, which I'm on the board of, didn't press their patents in other nations, there's no way that other companies are going to be able to manufacture these vaccines or a generic firm that's willing to get into this market and appropriate intellectual property, which is going to end up being the lower end of the generic market to start with. It's going to be able to figure out how to make these vaccines a highly specialized process. And the rate limiting factor right now is the production process itself. It's the raw materials that go into that production process, and the global shortage of those materials, and the very specialized machines doing the you need to get more inputs to get more output, and simply allowing some companies that are highly inefficient at manufacturing this, it's going to take them many months, if not years, to do it. And then they'll still have to run new clinical trials with those vaccines. Simply allowing them to start that process, you're not going to get any more vaccine out of it. So this is really an empty promise. If we do want to increase the supply of vaccine, I think there's things that the Biden administration
이런 식으로 유산소하는 거예요, 여러분.
substantial resources and protections behind the U.S. manufacturers to increase the global supply, and they put logistics on the ground in some of the lower middle income countries.
이런 식으로 훈련하면
Distribution
트레드밀에서 걷기보다 훨씬 혈관이 건강해요. 심장도 튼튼하고.
There's a lot they can do. They can go big here, and I think that there is a way to solve the problem of the inequities in the vaccine distribution, but simply allowing our intellectual property to be ripped off won't do that.
이따 오후에는 자전거 타야 되겠다.
It's a lesson we need to learn again and again.
자전거 타는 이유는 유산소로 타는 게 아니라
I'm hesitant to get, I don't want to get on a
저 숲속에 가서 타는데 하루 종일 일한 거 이렇게 스트레스 매니지먼트 하려고 타는 거예요. 유산소로 하는 게 아니라. 회계사 사무실에 들을지도 모르는데 정말.
I mean, hundreds of millions of dollars over the years in this messenger RNA platform. The company that you're on the board of, Pfizer, millions of dollars invested over time to get this. If we don't allow some type of profit to be earned on all that time and money spent to develop these things, they're not going to do it anymore. And it's such a simplistic view that people like Bernie said, but there is pressure from the WTO and the left to break these patents for these companies. And that, you know,
we had the same battles when I was at FDA in 2004. We back in the PEPFAR program. What happened was there were a lot of people, including many of the same people who are arguing in favor of breaking the patents here. We said that we shouldn't press our intellectual property, or we should allow it to be appropriated for the production of cheap dose combination HIV pills that could be distributed in Africa. We didn't feel comfortable with that. We didn't want U.S. funds to be used to buy what would amount to counterfeit medicine. We wanted to make sure that there was an assurance of safety. So we started to allow American companies to come together to allow their drugs to be made into those same fixed dose combinations, and we would put them through an expedited review process at FDA and give them a tentative approval, and that would be sufficient for the U.S. buying large volumes of those drugs distributed in Africa. That became the PEPFAR program. We assured the safety and efficacy of those drugs, and the U.S. manufacturers agreed not to press their intellectual property in those markets. Had we gone the other way, and just allow the patents to get ripped off and allow sort of the lower end of the generic market, companies like Cipla at the time, to manufacture those drugs. What we subsequently found when many of those drugs were subpotent or adulterated, we would have ended up distributing millions of doses of potentially subpotent drugs in Africa. It would have been a public health disaster if we had done that. So this is very reminiscent of the argument we had in 2004. People wanted to use the issue as a wedge into the patent issue.
These are so sophisticated, these little, in demand, these little lipid vesicles that we use. I can't imagine anyone else even having the skill or the technology to do it in the first place. So there's practical reasons and then there's theoretical reasons as well. Is Texas, which Texas opened up quickly, is Texas doing as badly as New Jersey and New York? Why are we seeing the disparity between the states that seem to be doing well and open more quickly and others that stayed closed or weren't as open and get a lot of vaccines? Is it a variant story?
It's probably an all-inclusive story. The South does look better than the North. They have been grappling with the variant. We haven't seen a big takeoff in cases. I mean, parts of Florida look hot right now, Miami. Texas looks pretty good. Where we see problems is Michigan, Massachusetts, the tri-state region. Part of this is that the infection rates, if you look at Michigan and Massachusetts, for example, the biggest surge of infection is between 10 and 19-year-olds. That's probably explained by the reopening of schools in some parts of those states. I hate to say it, I'm not saying we should close the schools, but we have to observe where the increased infections are. It's in 10 to 19-year-olds. It's also the variants in those parts of the country. It's probably a function of the fact that they're warming up later, so they haven't moved as many activities outdoors as you've seen in the South. So it's an all of the above issue right now. It's not just travel and people or adults moving around more. The infection spikes that we're seeing are in a younger age cohort.
Are we getting closer to your glut versus shortage for supply? What's your forecast for early May?
Well, I think by early April it's going to be widely available in most states. At least most people will be able to go online and get an appointment. You're already seeing that. Sort of early to mid-April. Right now, we've vaccinated at least 95 million Americans have at least one dose of vaccine. About 50 million Americans have 2 doses. We're certainly at about 25% of their population vaccinated. That's when they started to see the declines that were ascribed to the vaccination. We're right about that tipping point. We can just buy ourselves another couple of weeks, not really to take off from infection anywhere in the country. I think we'll be at the point we'll have enough vaccine in the population. We're vaccinating 3 million people a day. That's going to be a pretty significant backstop, combined with the warming weather against really a fourth wave. And I think we'll achieve that. It's a little touch and go over the next 2 weeks because we are seeing some rises in some parts of the country. But it's probably going to be regionalized. It's probably just some states that see the cases go up.
Now, what do? Hold our breath in the fall and about whether this is going to be an annual thing with vaccines? We just don't know at this point. When will we know?
I think we'll know probably in the fall. What's going to really determine what that fall and winter look like is whether or not we get a variant in the U.S. that can penetrate prior infection, penetrate prior immunity, like 1351 or 1351, the Brazilian variant, the South African variant. Those become really prevalent here. Right now, 26 in New York seems like it might be such a variant. We're not seeing wholesale reinfections. The reinfection rate of people we've actually sequenced with 1526, the New York variant, is actually quite low. We've seen about 1,500 cases. There's about 50 reinfections or people who've been vaccinated for at least one dose and got infected, which is relatively small. It's what you'd expect is less than 3%. So we're not seeing wholesale reinfections with 1526 right now. We'd probably be picking it up if it was occurring, although we're not really sequencing enough to determine that. So, unless we get a variant that can pierce prior immunity in the fall, I think we'll be okay. If we do get such a variant, hopefully we'll be able to fashion a new vaccine against it.
Hey, Doctor, what do we see? We keep hearing about reports around what are called breakthrough infections, people who effectively got the vaccine and then are getting infected afterwards. It's a very, very small number. That's the good news. But do we have any idea whether that's variant?
여러분, 지난주에 제가 한 운동 막 35분 그런 거는 유지 단계고요. 이 정도는 해야 몸이 좋아집니다.
Yeah, it looks like a small number right now when you look at some of the data that we do have. And CDC's data is about a month old. If you go to their website and you look at their March data on sequencing and variants, it's actually from February. You have to look at what's going on in cities and states. New York recently put up some data looking at people who got 1 dose of vaccine or 2 doses of vaccines and got infected and were sequenced. And so pattern. They had about maybe 5,000 people that were sequenced, and the rate of people who had one dose of vaccine and got infected in that pool was about 3%. It wasn't high, it was what you'd expect. And the rate of people who had two doses of vaccine and got infected was extremely small. It's probably happening, but it doesn't seem to be happening on a widespread basis, or we probably picking it up at this point.
Dr. Gowling, thanks. Early April. Almost early. Well, that's good. That's good to see. Thanks, Gary. That's today, Monday. See about 6 more times this week, hopefully. It's always a good idea. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
When we come back, forced selling by hedge fund Archegos Capital Management is crushing a lot of the media stocks in late-day trading on Friday. We're going to speak with analyst Rich Greenfield about the moves in names like Discovery and Viacom CBS. That's right after this break. And then at the top of the hour, Mohamed El-Arian on what investors can expect in the trading week ahead, what impact all of this hedge fund trade and the forced liquidation sale that we're seeing, what that could mean for the broader markets and for you. We'll be right back.
SFT 7 시리즈 하겠습니다. Fascia Stretching Training 7 시리즈. 제이 커틀러랑 필 히스 테니스 킬 하니 람보가 이 개발한 프로그램이에요. 맨 마지막에 30초 휴식 15개 7세트. SFT 7세트.
Discovery and Viacom CBS both down 27% on Friday. For the week, Discovery lost 25%, Viacom CBS plummeting 50%, drop reportedly due part to the forced liquidation of Bill Wang's positions in all of this. We talked to a Goldman Sachs margin call. Here's more about the media mayhem. Rich Greenfield, partner and co-founder at Blendcheck Partners. Good morning to you.
여러분, 지금 제가 하는 운동은 건강을 위해서 하는 운동이 아니에요. 이 정도로 운동 많이 하면 건강에 해로울 수도 있어요. 그냥 몸이 좋아지고 싶은 사람이 하는 운동이에요. 이 정도로 많이 운동하면 오히려 건강에 해로울 확률이 높아요. 근데 이렇게 롱텀으로 할 게 아니라 저는 이렇게 몸을 만들어야 되기 때문에 조금만 하도록 하겠습니다. 건강을 위해서는 하루에 이 정도 강도로 한 30분이면 충분하죠.
Every day on no news. Analyst days that were fine, but certainly weren't like, oh my God, these were amazing, and yet the stocks just kept going higher and higher and higher. And I think it now becomes increasingly clear that there was somebody that was buying sort of price agnostic all the way up and creating a larger and larger squeeze for a lot of investors who were skeptical of these moves, and it just sort of kept kind of self-propelling itself to ever higher levels until obviously it all came crashing down last week. So it's less about the fall, more of the craziness that irrational buying over the last 2 months.
So let's talk a bit about fundamentals if we can. I know nobody talks about fundamentals anymore, but when you look at Viacom, CBS, or Discovery, it's obviously been pushed down. Is it, do you look at this and say there's a buying opportunity because there was so much pressure on the way down? What valuation would you put on both of these companies?
No, look, I think that the challenge that everybody in the media space is having, and this is not unique to Viacom and Discover, everyone is trying to figure out how they transition to streaming. We put out a piece this morning basically talking about how if you look at all the major companies that have given out guidance, as well as sort of the big players that are already there like Netflix and Amazon, roughly 650 million global streaming subscribers are set to double to over 1.2 billion by 2024. And that means that's if everybody hits on their numbers. Now, you and I, Andrew, both know it's going to be hard for every single player in this group to win. And so I think the real question is going to be, which of these companies has either
오늘 오랜만에 운동
probably got a little bit more
충분히 했네. 한 80% 했어요. 실컷 하진 않고.
trying to grow their streaming businesses, and the one thing everyone's got to keep focused on is that the traditional business.
영어회화 잘하려면 종혜님 제일 싸게 영어회화 제일 잘하는 방법은 본인이 좋아하는 관심 분야에 외국 유튜버의 유튜브를 보시고 문장을 외워서 따라 하시고 그거를 이태원이나 홍대 가서 외국인들한테 써먹으세요. 네, 제일 싸게 무료로 영어 배울 수 있어요. 본인이 관심 있는 분야의 외국 유튜버 를 그분들이 하는 얘기를 듣고 외워. 여러분 외국 노래도 한 1000번 연습하면 발음 엄청 잘 나와요. 그래서 외국 유튜버가 하는 문장을 외워. 계속 연습해. 그래서 이태원이나 홍대 가서 써먹어. 아니면은 그냥 서울에 있는 호스텔 가서 주말에 하루 자. 거기 호스텔 주방 같은데 외국인들 엄청 많아요. 걔네들하고 얘기해. 무료로 하루 종일. 제일 싸게 제일 빨리 느는 방법입니다. 이거보다 좋은 방법이 있는 사람하고 얘기해 보세요. 없어요. 알았죠, 종이님? 저는 이제 본인이 관심 있는 분야의 외국 유튜버를 팔로우 하시고 그 문장을 외워. 계속 하루 종일 들어요. 계속 듣고 여러분 계속 따라하세요. 아셨죠? 네. 문법은 그냥 중학교 정도면 충분합니다. 네. 저 한 번도 제가 여태까지 ESL을 여기 와서 한 달밖에 안 다녀봤는데 오픽 있잖아요. 오픽 여러분 삼성 들어갈 때 보는 거 오픽 봤는데 저 최고 등급 맞았어요. 관심 있는 분야의 책도 좀 읽어보시고 사전 찾지 마세요, 여러분. 사전 찾으면 책 못 읽어. 진짜 너무 오래 걸려. 저는 그냥 모르면 그냥 넘어가요. 앞뒤 문장을 맞춰봐요. 그래서 저는 제가 관심 있는 분야의 영어로 된 책을 봅니다. 그러면 모르는 단어 안 찾아요. 그냥 넘어가고 뜻 몰라. 그냥 계속 하다 보면 그게 무슨 뜻이겠다라고 생각하고 사람들하고 써먹어. 그러면 저는 영어를 여기서 배워서 한국 단어로 한국 뜻을 모르는 영어가 많아요. 근데 그걸 언제 써야 되는지는 대충 알아. 예. 직역은 못하는데 하여튼 그래서 나중에 진짜 한국어 사전을 한 번도 안 찾아봤는데 제가 영어 단어를 여기서 배웠는데 그걸 한국말로 얘기하면 대부분이 다 맞아요. 되게 신기하지 않아요? 그런 식으로 하세요. 네. 저는 이제 오늘의 1분짜리 외국어 영상, 영어 영상을 찍고 저는 하루를 잘 보내려고 합니다. 여러분들 한국에 계신 분들은 잘 보내시고 편안한 밤 주무시고 뭐 외국 계시는 분들 잘 보내시고 영상이 유용하다고 생각하시면 좋아요, 구독 부탁드리고요. 내일도 이런 식으로 당분간은 이런 식으로 운동을 올해 많이 열심히 할 생각입니다. 제가 몸을 좀 만들어야 돼요. 제가 좀 뭐 같은 행사가 생겨서 몸을 좀 만들 일이 생겼어요. 그래서 체지방 감량에는 유산소보단 이렇게 근력 운동을 열심히 하면 칼로리 소모도 되고 근육도 만들어져서 자연적으로 이렇게 다이어트가 됩니다. 그래서 여러분들 근육이 부족하신 분들은 이런 식으로 훈련하세요. 유산소 하지 마시고 이런 식으로 하세요. 아셨죠? 네. 영상이 유용하다 생각하면 좋아요, 구독, 알람 설정 부탁드리고요. So thanks for watching today. I hope you guys have a great morning, afternoon, and evening. So if you found this video helpful, please hit that like button and share with your friends and family. If you have any question, you can write down here, comment below, and I will answer for you for sure within 24 hours. Okay? So have a great one. Thank you so much. Thank you. 감사합니다. 안녕.